So first two questions go to Mr. Clanton. What are the minimum parliamentary procedures one should have to properly execute a Civic League meeting?
All right. Good evening, everyone. So to that question, the minimum parliamentary procedure, particularly, I'll put it in two different categories. That would be the individual who is presiding, and then the individual member. So if you're presiding, you need to know a little bit more because you've got to keep things moving. And so things like having tools like this book here, that literally down the middle of the spine here, it helps you with the basics of how to make a motion, how to knowing how to recognize someone, give them the floor, go through the process of hearing the motion, knowing whether or not that motion requires a second, if not, but it's particularly a main motion, going through discussion, making sure that the meeting is orderly. So I would say on the presiding side, knowing those things is the basics. As a member, knowing what your rights are. And that basics is how to get up, get recognized, how to make a motion. And those who know me, so moved is not a proper motion. That's what I call the church motion, and that's not so move what? It's either I move to or I move that. So knowing that is half the battle, and that gets you started in the right direction. Okay? So I mean, you've got probably a second question for me, right?
The second question is, what are the top 3 to 5 most frequent mistakes?
Okay, so first one is not being prepared. I always tell individuals there's the work before the meeting, during the meeting, and after the meeting. And so if you are an officer, this is particularly the presiding officer, there's the preparation, making sure the agenda is in alignment, making sure that individuals know what's on the agenda, make sure that the reports, working with the secretary, the minutes and so forth there. So not being prepared is one of those things. The other thing is overextending your privilege. And I'll say that in that respect, that even though if you are a presiding officer, understanding and respecting the rights of individuals, that you set the tone. I always remind an individual, if you're the president of your civic league or what it may be, if you lose your cool, then you make it acceptable for everyone else in the room to lose their cool. So no matter what's going on, you set the temperature. You keep things going, you keep it at an even flow there. On the other thing, and when it says top 4 or 5 mistakes, not knowing. Just that, if you don't know something, state that you don't know something, that you'll follow up with the information. It's better to ask for grace in that respect rather than giving the wrong information out and then having to clean it up. So if you don't know something, state it. If you don't know, you'll get that information, or get you someone who's on the board that's going to serve as your parliamentarian, or if you have an attorney or something that's in your civic league that you can refer to. So I would say those are probably some of the 3 mistakes that are common there, but definitely keeping your cool, being prepared, and if you don't know, just be truthful and honest that you don't know. I think people will work with you if you need to find out that information.
Thank you, Mr. Clanton. Any other thoughts? Other panelists? Okay. Next, we'll go to Mr. Brooks. Here's a question. Our Civic League has an annual audit of the past year conducted in January by a 2-person audit team who goes through it with our treasurer. One member of the audit team is also a board member. Is this a good practice, or do you have other suggestions? Do you have an audit checklist?
Yes, so first of all, I want to applaud that board member for wanting to be a part of the process, but I would recommend that board member not be a part of the process, and that there are 2 members, from the Civic Association that go through the audit, that they also educate other members so they can go through, so you don't always have the same 2 people going through an audit together. At a bank, for example, when I worked for JP Chase, we would want other members of the team to go through the audit, so we're switching it up. It is not the same 2 people. Not to say that those same 2 people would do something fraudulent, but you want to make sure that you're protecting the integrity of the process of the audit, and that in this case, the board member is further away and that you can communicate the results. I do have an audit checklist, that I can send out, but one of the things that's important is, once again, making sure that you're training and/or I use the term educating other members to be able to go through the process. And number two, what is the frequency? That you maintain the frequency of that audit. Is that audit monthly? Is it quarterly? Is it semi-annually? And then making sure that you are communicating the results out. That's important.
Okay, thank you. And I'd like to move over here. So the next question from Mr. Brooks. We have a large amount of money in our bank account, but would like to hold on to it. At the same time, we're asking for sponsors to help us fund our upcoming second annual Memorial Day Parade. Ethically, is this acceptable?
First of all, I just applaud you for having a large amount of money because I'm sure you did some fundraising, within your community. There is nothing that is, unethical about going out and, soliciting, local businesses, for sponsorship. So once again, you can absolutely do that because the money you have could be allocated for different purposes, within the association. And then, specifically for sponsorships, for events, you can go out to different partners. So absolutely, there's nothing unethical about that.
Thank you. Ms. Morring, your top two questions. What are the legal issues that a Civic League's board of directors should be aware of?
Well, that could be a lengthy answer. But the long and the short of it is, as a board of director, in any capacity, whether you're talking about a civic league or a nonprofit or a for-profit, the number one thing that a board of directors should understand is that they have what they like to call in Virginia a fiduciary duty. And that fiduciary duty kind of spans for everything that they do. And what that means is they can then, they have to think about what they're doing, the capacity in what they're doing, and whether or not it's in the best interest of that group, whether it's the civic league, the nonprofit, or the for-profit. So you think of it, say, for a church and a church trustee, for instance. You have to think about whether or not you're going to be doing something that could bind the organization or your civic league, and whether or not that duty somehow comes back on you as being somewhat off, right? And you don't want it to be off. So in layman's term, you think about fiduciary duty as something that's really a heavy burden, but it's a good one. It keeps you honest, it keeps those others on the board of directors honest, and it also ensures that all the decisions that you're making have been made with a lot of care, and you're going to hear about that duty, and you've done your duty of due diligence, rather, to invest time and effort to ensure that all the decisions that you're making in that capacity are for the best of that organization, and in this capacity for the Civic League. So first, I would say, just think about your fiduciary duty. Second, I would say, in that same vein, what are you doing to legally bind or sign on behalf of that Civic League? So a lot of times, and I've gotten calls where maybe the board has signed off on something and they didn't follow Robert Rules of Order. There wasn't a formal meeting. It was done outside of a committee at a McDonald's or whatever. So you have to ensure, again, that you're applying the due diligence, that you're recognizing that if you enter into any binding agreement on behalf, that you're doing that, and then someone may say, we're gonna come after you, right? And that's a no-no. Legally, you don't want that. You're gonna say, oh, wait a minute, I was just serving as a board of director, I really didn't have it. But when you accept this role, it is a huge responsibility, and it's a serious one. Now, do you find it common when people come after a civic league president or a secretary or so forth? No. But I do think it is a legal duty, it's a responsibility, and that if you engage in this role, that you ought to know that it's a serious one. Lastly, I think this comes up frequently, record keeping. Okay, having and keeping good records, having some ability to establish where those records are, who's keeping those records, how far they go back, are they electronically, are they being kept mail? That's really important, because if you're doing something with your fiduciary duty, if you've done your due diligence, then you want to have some record of all of that, because that just does what? Cover yourself. And so having good record keeping is really, really, really like the gold standard in practice for organizations. And if I can piggyback on...
Sure, please do.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was going to piggyback on two of the things that you had, but definitely I want to keep you in the flow.
No, you go ahead.
No, when you mentioned about about potentially being sued, that was about the directors and officers insurance, and I don't think, I know a lot of, like, I run a foundation nonprofit down there to protect those individuals when they come on board, having something in place like that. So if you should get sued, or you have an event or something like that, you've got all those different things. And then the other one I was thinking was about when you talk about keeping the records, having some type of policy in place to build continuity between, because a lot of times, civic leagues, boards change and so forth. This is how we do this, and how those records should be kept, and what should be kept legally for, like, IRS tax filing and so forth down there.
Right. In profit, they would have like an operating agreement or something to kind of give the incoming board some level of establishment where, okay, how are we supposed to operate? Who's responsible for what? That type thing. We're not that fancy, right? Not every civic league is going to have all of this fancy stuff. So if you just think about it as an umbrella of protection, if you don't have certain legal documents, but think about it as, okay, you have a fiduciary duty, you're supposed to be diligent, we need to have at least some evidence or policy about record keeping. It can prevent a lot of hassle coming down. And yes, establishing and having insurance is always good as well. But there's a cost to all of that. There's costs to preparing these legal documents, right? You can talk about them all day, but then you have to get someone to prepare them, and then they have to say what they say, and then we go down a rabbit hole. So if you think about it in a general sense, if you just strapped for cash and you really just want to just be solid and transparent, I would say stressing the fiduciary duty, the due diligence, and good record keeping is pretty standard. And then something he was talking about, Joe here, as far as fundraising, because I think that's a really good way of applauding someone that may have a lot of cash. It's always good to have reserves, okay? So when you think about extra money, and sometimes organizations, whether large or small, think about, what are we gonna do with all this money? Should we be doing this? There's always ways to say, we have these in reserves. And so you can take that extra fund and then say, we're gonna reserve this, even though we have it, we have this in reserves. And that's sort of like an organization's rainy day fund, okay? And so most corporations and things, they will have a reserve, so if something happens, we already got that covered, but we're still engaging in fundraising to raise for areas in different areas and to keep our reserves at a certain level, okay? So it's always good to have reserves. All right.
This is very helpful.
Good.
Okay, next question from Ms. Morring. When, if at all, do you recommend separate liability insurance for the Civic League board itself? Our Civic League has general liability insurance and adds on special event riders for ourselves and when participating with local organizations such as our Memorial Day Parade.
Well, I would say that would really depend upon what role the board, what are they engaging in? If you think they're really going to be binding the Civic League to a lot, and when I say binding, legally binding, maybe there's some real estate involved, that some type of big contract, a development deal, those type things, then you would want to protect the decisions of the board of directors. And sometimes that will come in the form of a surety bond that could maybe protect them, and those aren't as expensive as, say, a general liability policy. So you can kind of Google a surety bond company, and they have different levels of surety bonds that you can purchase just for that particular board or for a certain amount of time. But then again, you could also go with an extra rider. Again, you're talking about money when you're talking about insurance, things of that sort. But when you do that, you're also protecting. You're doing, again, that fiduciary responsibility, your duty of care, your due diligence, in protecting the decision makers from anybody, what we like to call in law, piercing the corporate veil. So you don't want anybody coming and piercing and actually coming and getting Joe's money, right? Right? No, Joe made the decision. He's volunteering. He's been elected, selected. However, he's on this board of directors. But you want to protect those decisions. And so I think that will be on a case-by-case basis based upon what the board of directors are facing, what they're doing. And the biggest thing there is, are they making contracts? Are they, do they own property? Is there something legally binding that could legally bind this group that you want to protect them from?
This is very helpful. So that was round one. Give everybody a hand or a round of applause for round one. Here's round two. Mr. Clanton, when attendance is spotty, how do you get minutes approved or make other time-sensitive decisions? Can the board review and approve?
So let me unpack that in a couple different ways. So your bylaws will dictate for you what a quorum is going to be. So if you're in a situation where you don't have a quorum at a meeting, the first thing I would say is that if you don't have a quorum, the question always, and I guess that's the million-dollar question, can you transact business? And Robert Rules of Order would tell you, yes, you can transact business. However, at the very next meeting, a motion needs to be made. It's the first thing, which is to ratify with a 2/3 vote of everything that took place at the last meeting. Okay. Another thing that I hear about a lot of times, if you want to save time, send your minutes out ahead of time. Even in my fraternity, they still take motions and seconds on the minutes. But if there are no corrections to the minutes and the minutes don't need to be amended, you can approve them with unanimous consent. There's no objection, and keep it moving. So when it comes down to this time-sensitive things, so minutes that just, if you're in a situation where you don't have the necessary quorum number to kind of transact business, just know that you can move with items. Now, if your board and your bylaws dictate and say that your board of directors has the authority to act on behalf of the general membership in between meetings and so forth, then you're giving away or giving up a certain amount of authority. Typically, the minutes of the body itself need to be approved by the body, because the minutes of the executive or board or whatever it may be, that executive board would be of that executive board, and so you can't disapprove the two out there, so that's still separate. So I hope that makes sense. Does that make sense to everybody?
Perfect, wonderful. Next question for Mr. Clinton. When providing input to city leaders, when is formal voting recommended versus conducting surveys?
So let's look at this in two different things. So a formal vote is going to be of action, and it's going to be signifying that this civic league has taken a vote of its members, and we want you to do X, Y, and Z, or we stand in position of X, Y, and Z. A survey is just that. It's getting general opinion, but not necessarily we want you to act. So if you look at it that way, you can definitely get a survey and tell your council member, we surveyed our members and this is how they felt on this one. But if you put a motion behind it and you put it in a resolution format, that's saying that not only have we surveyed our members, but we've surveyed them with a vote, and this is what we're now telling you. Now, therefore, be resolved. We want you to do something. Does that make sense? So I would look at it in those two different things. One is I'm telling you I want you to do something that is an official from the Civic League versus we just surveyed some folks, and you kind of get a temperature. But now we're giving you what we want you to do.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Brooks, you're up. First of two questions. What are 6 or so ideas for attracting new members? Doesn't have to be 6, but what are your best ideas for attracting new members?
So the first thing I would do with attracting new members is conduct a survey. What would draw members in? What would, inspire them to want to be a part of the civic So what sort of things would really add value to them? And then I would move from there. Some other things that you can do is collaborate with other organizations within the community, like public-facing organizations, whether it's houses of worship or schools. For example, the first day of school, right? There are new residents who come right into a neighborhood, and what are they doing? They're sending their kids to school. So oftentimes you may be able to meet them on that first day of school, or you can work with the school's leadership to be able to distribute your flyers. So, that's something that you can do. Also, it goes back to adding value. What sort of workshops would residents be interested in, right? That would really add value to them in terms of maybe it's wills and estates, right? Maybe it's financial literacy. Workshops that they would want to come and attend, and they feel that, hey, this is adding value, to my home life. And then town halls, right? Town halls, if they're done correctly, are always a good lightning rod for the community, because you're talking about issues that are happening within the community. You're inviting elected officials in, and certainly elected officials will come because that's a captive audience, right? They're representing, that constituency. So those are some of the things I would do to attract new members. But once again, starting with that survey, what are some of the hot buttons that would make people want to show up at a civic association?
Thank you. That's one of the most frequent questions we get, is how to attract new members. Next question for you, Mr. Brooks, is what are some of your best ideas for fundraising?
Right, so something synonymous with this country is what in the United States? Raffles, right? And people get excited about that, and it's still, whether it's in the workplace or whatever space that you're working in, raffles seem to attract people and get people excited. So working with a local business that the community supports to be able to donate, whether it's a product or service that you can, raffle off. Also partnering with the local business. Maybe it's a night out in the restaurant in which you're going to share in some of the proceeds, right? I think the other thing is, what about a game night? There's a software called, I think it's Kahoot, right? And I know that in New York City, where I lived for many years, in the association, they actually had a game night, and they had all sort of trivia, and everybody signed on virtually, and it was extremely popular, right? So I'd recommend that. And then also aligning yourself with some of the national giving days, like a Giving Tuesday, which this last year was on November 28th, which is a national day of giving. So being able to align yourself with that, for individuals to be able to give and fundraise, because that money is going back in the community. And maybe even establishing your own, giving day each year that is very specific to your community, where people are able to give. And it's really, really important with fundraising to be able to share how your donation is being used, right? So folks don't feel like, hey, it's going into a black hole. You're connecting it to specifically what you're doing, whether it's beautification, whether it's a nonprofit you're supporting. So those are some of the things. And of course, volunteerism, right? So I think volunteerism helps fundraising. People, also like to volunteer, so you can connect that as well.
Wonderful ideas. These are very helpful. I'm glad we're recording this. I also want to thank you for color coordinating. I just noticed that you all were blue and color coordinated with each other. You matched our city colors, so thank you for that. Much appreciated.
So can I give them here's a free resource for fundraising, givebutter.com. It's one word, givebutter.com, but it's an online platform that you can use to fundraise. But one of the other things that you have power in numbers and in relationship, it allows you also to do crowdfunding. So you can do that raffle, and you may have an item, and you can ask your members, hey, could you ask 10 people that you know just to give $10? And so you can do that virtually. And Give Butter is free, so it doesn't cost your association anything up front. But you can do silent auctions, you can do virtual events, all those things. And they give you a really cool every week email about different resources and things that you can do, and give you templates for free.
Got it.
Thank you, great resource.
Yep.
All right, next two questions are from Ms. Morring. What are the top pitfalls civic leagues can face?
Well, I think the first, thinking about fundraising, I think the top thing is failing to connect with the small businesses in your area. When we think about civic leagues or communities, a lot of times there's a focus on the homeowners, but typically there are some small business owners in the area. And those small business owners, as Joe alluded to, can actually help you with your fundraising. So I think what I see is that failing to just stop, get to know that business, see if you can help each other. You know, the old saying, iron sharpens iron. The business may want to get out to some of the community members that I'm here and I'm here for you. That's why I came to this community. Clearly, if they're there, they've invested their time and energy and money. So seeing how you can work with the small businesses, I think is one of the top pitfalls. Because sometimes some of the small businesses also hear Scutterbug, right? So they hear about something that they're trying to do with that land over there, or development deal, and sometimes the civic leagues are the last to kind of know what's really coming down. So I think from a fundraising perspective, as well as a knowledge perspective, getting to know and communicate with the small businesses or the businesses that are in your community is quite important. Second, I think a top pitfall is leadership fatigue. Okay, there's always the loyal few that are going to be there, they're going to run the show, that do the agenda, that get the butts in the seat, so to say. And sometimes there can be fatigue in that. And when you get fatigue, you get, let's just do it this way, and get stuck, and there's no really change. And then you start asking the same questions. How do we get new members? How do we get that? So I think the top two would be the failure to connect and leadership fatigue. Recognizing when it's time to pass the mantle. Seeking out leadership that is going to embrace change, that is willing to listen, and not just stuck in the way they've been doing it because I'm the one running the show. So I know talk may be talk tight, but it's right, as they used to say. And I'm sure that if you've been involved with a civic league, you've at one point felt it. So understanding that fresh ideas are welcome, and if you're tired, being willing to say, tired, let's step aside, let's get somebody else in here. And so we can move forward.
These are great. I'm so excited about the information that you are giving us, because these are things that we hear about all the time. So second question for Ms. Morring. If a neighbor has no recourse against a nuisance neighbor through city enforcement, where do they go to pursue the matter through the courts? We get this a lot. When it's not a code enforcement issue, it's not something the city has any legal jurisdiction to do anything about, because it's a civil matter. How do people, seek recourse?
Okay, so the key word in this hypothetical is there's no recourse through the city enforcement, okay? Which tells me as a lawyer a little bit, there may be some law on the books, right? But it doesn't apply to this particular nuisance, and there's no way that the city can really intervene. But you have a neighbor who really feels like this is a nuisance, and there's no HOA, there's no homeowners association, there's no bylaws in that respect to kind of guide them to, here you're gonna get a fine, a penalty there. So typically you would go to general district court. This is what really would be a real estate matter, okay? You would be bound by nuisance laws in Virginia. It's a long bevy of lists. You would have to prove things in court. You would have to file and be responsible for the court costs. And so, I think now it may be $60 or so. You would have to get that neighbor served. So essentially, you would have to go down to Norfolk General District Court. They also have a small claims court, okay? But they are very limited in what they hear. So you would either do the small claims court or the General District Court. And you would bring your civil claim based upon whatever that basis is. It doesn't really give any facts here. And then it will be placed on the docket, they will be served, and you could move forward in that respect. The challenge with going to court for nuisance on your neighbor is great, okay? That's why homeowners associations really have thrived, because they cut out a lot of that litigation for the courts. Frankly, I don't speak for all judges and courts, but I'm sure they don't want to be bogged down with, he keeps his music up until 8:30 and he's supposed to have it off at 9 o'clock. Police came, they couldn't hear it from there, they didn't do anything. What's my recourse? But to say, stop it, right? And it can be annoying. However, there is recourse, and it would really have to depend upon the situation, what facts you have. I've seen things in law school. I remember reading about, the window or the tree and, all sorts of things. Oh, that's in my way. I have an easement onto your property, and I didn't realize that I had an easement. So real estate law can get really intricate, but if it's simple, minor, then I would say you either go to small claims or General District Court. If you really feel like it involves an easement, and for those who don't know what that is, say for instance, you got a neighbor and the neighbor has been using your driveway, a portion of your driveway, to get to his backyard, and has been doing that for several years. In Virginia, that neighbor could actually, through your allowing him or her to do that, could create an easement to your home, which means that they would have more of a right to that than you, and you would then have to fight to get that back. So yes, there's a lot of quirky things. And so I understand when you see something or recognize something, you do want to take care of it, because if you allow it for too long, particularly if it involves your property, then you may actually be giving away a property right that you don't know about. So if it's something of that manner, I would suggest that you seek a consultation with an attorney before you go down to the court, to ensure that you're protecting yourself and you know what you're asking for.
Thank you. So, as a follow-up, what kind of attorney would they be looking for?
I would say real estate first, and or someone who handles general litigation, civil litigation.
Okay, thank you. That is terrific. Well, not that we're encouraging people to go sue each other.
No. City of Norfolk is friendly. I grew up in the city of Norfolk. We borrow eggs and sugar from our neighbors, and very close to, I know my mom still lives here. She's very close to her neighbors. So being a Norfolk gal, I went right here to Norview. I can't say we've had those disputes. But the reality of it is, it happens. We all have someone that we know that we wish they did something with their yard. We wish they did something with their land. And what is your recourse with that? And so.
Well, that is very helpful. We appreciate it. So that completes round 2. And then we have one more round. And these get a little shorter, I think. Mr. Clanton, what basic committees are required, if any, for a civic league?
So again, going back to your bylaws, to be perfectly honest, it's up to the organization as to what committees you want to establish. There's your main committees, which are the ones that you codify in your bylaws, and then you have ad hoc. At minimum, I would say that you want to have some type of executive committee that may be able to do some things, to act on behalf of the group in between. You want to have some type of finance committee so that you can review finance reports, do the audit, so forth there. Then kind of I get into my whole association thing, but some type of governance committee. And when I talk about governance, that's lot of times we get bylaws, and that bylaw sits on, voted on it, and then it sits on the shelf. But having regular opportunities to review that, put that on the schedule, even if you come up with some standing rules for your group, you can say, you know, that these are the times that we're going to meet. You know, and that's the thing too, knowing what's a standing rule versus what's in your bylaws. That standing rule can be easily changed, and you kind of ratchet up the amount of requirement it takes for your body to change things. And I always remind folks that when you look at Robert Rules of Order, you look at parliamentary authority, it's there to protect your rights as an individual member and to make sure that things run accordingly. So I would say it's the right of the majority to govern and the right of the minority to be heard. So when you look at that, again, it's up to you as to what's going to be standing. And standing just simply means that this is a continuous, ongoing committee. If it's not a continuous, ongoing committee and it's just something special for a period of time, then it's a special or ad hoc committee, and it has some type of sunset. Once X, Y, and Z has been done, it's over. But look at it in respect of your main committees. That's kind of based on what you do in your house, as I call it, your civic league. And so if you do have an annual fundraiser, you may make that a standing committee because it's an annual thing that comes around every year, and it may take a year to be prepared for that. So that's why I'd say it could be a broad number of things, but it's really up to you.
Thank you. So this question is probably from another city like Virginia Beach or Portsmouth, probably not Norfolk, because I don't think we have this problem in Norfolk. But do you have any advice on how to handle contentious speakers?
Keep your cool. Again, I kind of spoke to that earlier. Particularly in that situation, if you have, it's going to be to the presiding officer. As long as you can maintain that level and not engage in what I would say is lose your cool, then that gives free rein to everyone else in the room that this is the norm and you can do that. Now, you may place some things in rules, like, I mean, at the school board, everyone has 3 minutes. City council does the same thing, you know, when people want to come up and make public comment. But it's also, it's really that art of the presiding officer to be able to, you know, because sometimes you get individuals who like to talk and keep talking and keep talking. And so you know your members. And so it's that being able to move on without being disrespectful to them, or just, you know, being able to be unique and knowing, hey, we've got a parking lot, you know, that's a good point. And you know, I know that you're passionate about that, but let's go ahead and put this in a parking lot here, and you know, and we'll come back to this. Again, making sure that people feel valued and that what they say does have value, even though it may not be at the appropriate point there. But again, if you're the presiding officer, which 9 out of 10 times those things are coming to you, and I'm talking about the president, you want to make sure that you maintain that. Now, other officers that may be on the dais or that may be there, again, same thing to you. If the presiding officer is there, and that doesn't mean, because you may be beefing with somebody, doesn't mean this is an opportunity for you to jump in, because that creates another thing. So we just got to kind of know your environment, and just allow people an opportunity to kind of get what they want off the chest in a respectful manner. But if they're being, you know, and like I said, put it in the parking lot, that's one tactic of doing the thing, or let's table this particular item. It's not dismissing, but it's giving you time so that you can maybe have a sidebar conversation, or even refer it to another time, take action of the entire civic league and say, you know what, this item, let's go ahead and get a motion to defer, and we'll deal with this at the next meeting. Again, that allows the organization as a whole to be able to address it, but address it in a respectful manner. Sometimes you need to have, you know, they say, cool heads prevail. In that respect of maybe we need to recess. Maybe, and so again, that all comes back to the presiding officer there to know the temperature of your room. And maybe sometimes you just need, okay, let's take a break. We'll come back, have a sidebar, and come in. So I know I routed off a couple different tactics and things, but Robert will tell you on some things that you have there, but knowing and employing those things down there, knowing the temperature of the room and keeping things moving forward.
Thank you. I'm sure none of you have that problem in Norfolk, right? Nobody. Okay. Next question is for Mr. Brooks. If my civic league wants to have more of a collective impact, where do we start?
so collective impact. So when you say collective impact, it is normally aligned to a specific issue in the community, right? And collective impact was created around no one organization can solve some of the most significant issues in society, and in this instance, in a community, whether it's homelessness, food insecurity, whether it is teen violence, whatever it is, no one organization, can solve that. You have to bring players around the table, and I mean by players, players in sort of the public theater, whether that's your elected officials who should have the power to move the needle to be able to help resolve the issues, whether it's nonprofits who can provide wraparound services, whether it's your public servants like police, or fire. Depending on what that specific issue is, you have to bring those folks that I just mentioned around the table and have the discussion regarding that specific issue. So I, worked at a local nonprofit here, and there was an issue out in the local, community, and they created, it was Campostella actually, the Campostella Task Force. They created, a sort of collective impact approach, right? Because there was mental health issues, there was unemployment, there was teen violence. So no one organization can solve those things, right? So bringing your elected officials around, bringing representation, from law enforcement, bringing nonprofits around that can help provide wraparound services to be able to wrap, their arms around that community to be able to advance it and help it and improve it. In this instance, they saw a decrease, in violence. So that's what that question, when I hear collective impact, is how do we surround ourselves with the individuals and offices and representatives in the community to be able to resolve those issues. And some of them are very significant and large that are consistent throughout our society, and I just mentioned some of them. Other things could be trash removal, but it could be a issue in the community that is festered, right? And they just, the members and residents can't think of, like, how do I resolve it? And then you have to reach back around to the people that, you put in office, and then other people in the community to be able to, resolve that issue.
Thank you.
Collectively.
That is great information. Here's the final question. This is from Ms. Morring. What are duties of care, loyalty, and obedience?
Those words, duties of care, loyalty, and obedience, really stem from what I talked about earlier, that fiduciary duty, your due diligence, and they typically apply to the board of directors, to your officers. But I would say and implore you to think about it as applying to all of us. We all have a duty of care. When you step into this community center today, you had a duty of care to ensure that you knew where you were, that you were taking care of this great civic, community center here in Norview. And so I think it goes beyond just the board of directors, but in a board of directors sense, which is where I think the question came from, it really means you can't be haphazardly accepting this position and not taking it serious. Being able to read, being able to ask questions. Anyone can just sit down and say, okay, I've done it. But what's going to come by you that could bind the civic league or bind the community or hinder the community? So I think duty of care just goes directly into that fiduciary duty that we talked about, the duty of due diligence, the duty of accountability that any leader or officer in a civic league really would be expected to have. Same with loyalty, kind of is self-explanatory, but that loyalty means you're going to be loyal to the rules, loyal to the law, loyal to the community, and loyal and respectful to your members and constituents. I think that's very, very important in speaking on what Carlos was speaking on as far as, keeping your cool, maintaining the vision of the Civic League or of the board without giving any bad energy with that. I think that is establishing that we're here for a reason, we're here for the greater good. This is not personal. Even though I have a personal investment here in this community, I'm doing this for the greater good. And I think that loyalty then expands to the people around you, your neighbors, the people, the members of the Civic League. All right, and then obedience. Again, a little self-explanatory, but I think of that in the sense of law, right? Rules, bylaws, things that are going to keep order, so you can actually get business done. A lot of times when you have a civic league or any organization such as a civic league, a community organization, you want to be able to have two things: finished business and unfinished business. All right, so when you get the finished business, you can go on to the unfinished. That's going to require that you be obedient to Robert rules of order, that you establish meeting times, committees, and that you're consistent with that, and that you actually accomplish things. So when I think of obedience in this way, I think of just following the rules, following the law, ensuring that you do have bylaws to follow. And again, if there is something that you don't know, reach out to those in the community, get an answer to it. Don't just try to haphazardly say, oh yeah, we should be able to do that. Get a good answer. Again, that just goes back to that due diligence that I think anybody involved in the Civic League has a right to do. That you're expected to be diligent in everything you do.
Wonderful. This is great advice. I think, unless I mess the questions up, I think we've gone through all the questions that I gave you. And so we're doing good on time. You all have done a terrific job, right on point. So we have some extra time to take, if you don't mind, take questions from the audience. Do we have any questions?
If I was to call that phone number you got listed here, could I get a copy of the audio checklist emailed to them?
Sure, yep.
Which number is it? The 748 number?
No,
48 is what's standing. Understand, what number should I call?
Oh, you're looking for the.
I think he might be looking at my parliamentarian.
Oh,
yes.
I want to make sure.
Can I give you a number to call?
Yeah, I think he's asking about
Me, 71.
Okay.
And
I already covered.
Mr. Brooks' big passion right now is financial literacy, correct?
Yes.
So he can, address any number of issues, but that's an area that he's really passionate about right now and certainly has the expertise. So,
Yep.
Good resource for your neighborhoods.
I would like to add, the procedure for civic leagues is really great, and there is a cheat sheet in there that I would really recommend anybody who's serving on the board or who's attended a meeting. Mr. Clanton, I thought, did a really good job of that. That is, I think, would be really helpful. And you got to teach the new folks, right? And so this actually, I think, will serve as a good way to kind of train some of the younger people who are coming in and who are not accustomed to order in the manner that it should be in these settings.
That's where they have this book back here. So if you're president or you're chairing anything, it's a great resource. We had a couple of years. The information is still good. You can literally find out what you need to do, hit the tab, and then it tells you exactly what you need to do. Is it required a second? Is it debatable? So it's a real good guide. So if you're on the fly. I would also say if you're a presiding officer, always have some resource like this. If you state that Robert's order is your parliamentary authority, have that with you. But most importantly, have your bylaws and your constitution, or if that's what you have, with you. So if anyone ever challenges you on something, you've got it right then and there to be able to refer to it.
And if you're wrong, admit you're wrong.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. You know, it's right. It's right here. It can always be corrected. Make sure the minutes reflect it and move on.
Very good. We are very thankful to Mr. Clanton for that guide. We keep it on our website, norfolk.gov/NBN Library. So that's available to anybody. And Mr. Clanton told us about those little booklets, so we bought a box of those a couple of years ago. They're also a good resource. Any other questions?
I did have another suggestion. I don't know if the community has, but when talking about really good ideas, if your Civic League hasn't created a Facebook group, those have been across the nation really important to keep the neighborhood, the residents, crime, what's going on. People get in there, they get chatty. Yes, they may talk about different things, but Facebook groups for certain areas across the nation have just really become popular. And so if your Civic League creates one, you could use it as a way to say, hey, there was a burglary up here, just in case you know. 'Cause some people don't read the news. Some people steer away from the newspaper, but they will go on social media. So using social media in a way where it could be a closed group, because you can create it where they would have to establish that they live in your neighborhood and they could be a member of this group. And then you will be able to not only get your messaging out, but get some more involvement that maybe from people who may not have typically become involved. So I do strongly encourage Facebook groups.